This story is told in Stella's words. I met my future husband after a friend invited me to a youth group function when we were both 17. I hadn't been to church before, but I liked the music and the cute bass player too. He turned out to be Andre. A friend of ours introduced us, and we started dating immediately. Because he was at church, I kept attending, and I soon heard the message and accepted Christ later that summer and was baptized. We continued to date and followed each other to college in Minnesota. In the summer of 1999, he proposed. We got married in August of 2000. After college, in 2002, we moved back home to Missouri. One day later, Andre was T-boned on the highway, crushing his right leg and pinning him in the vehicle. The call I received from the hospital was the scariest moment of my life. Then, seeing him in the ER, covered in glass, blood, and screaming, it was completely horrific. I immediately called pastors and they came. We prayed and he made it through. He had emergency surgery with lots of rods and pins inserted into his body. He would be in a wheelchair for the next 6 months. Those 6 months that followed were terrible. He had severe depression and talked about wanting to die many, many, many times, and it was hard. He was in pain constantly and couldn't do much for himself. He couldn't work, so he tried to take some college classes, but the transportation and getting around campus was a nightmare. Finally, around Christmas of that year, he was out of the wheelchair. He was still in a lot of pain, but doing well with crutches and a cane. By spring, he was moving around well and had a new job, so we decided to have a baby. We were super blessed to get pregnant on our first try. I took my pregnancy test on Father's Day, and it was positive. After getting pregnant, Andre started to really get weird. He was bouncing in and out of depression and began drinking too much too often. He would go out with friends and drink until he passed out. He would stay in the basement and the garage for hours. I told myself that he was just trying to get out the wildness before the baby came. I cried and I prayed a lot. February 2004, our baby girl was born. On the way to the hospital, Andre grabbed my hand and prayed the most beautiful prayer. Everything was going to be okay. And it was for a little while. And then we accidentally got pregnant with our new baby only 6 months old. I was terrified, and Andre flipped out and started drinking again. He was in the basement almost all of the time, very depressed. After our second baby was born in 2005, I convinced him that he needed to see a doctor. His doctor diagnosed him with depression, and he began trying prescriptions. The results were bad. He was either a zombie or crying all the time. He felt miserable. He stopped taking the pills and started to see a counselor. At first, it seemed like an answer to the prayers. My husband was talking out all his issues and working through things and developing some coping mechanisms. There was a little depression here and there, but for a few months things were decent. Andre was still in a lot of pain from his car accident and had a follow-up surgery to remove scar tissue in the fall of 2006. He started being angry a lot and drinking again. We began to fight a lot, and by the winter he was self-destructing and we decided to separate. We lived apart for about a month. In March of 2007, one of his friends asked him to come to his church. Andre called me and asked if I would meet him there. We met in the parking lot, went in, and sat together. As the pastor began to preach from the book of Mark, we realized that the sermon was all about marriage and divorce and God's will for reconciliation. Both crying, we went forward after service and asked elders to pray with us. My husband came back home that night, and the next day we made an appointment to see a psychologist. Over the next few weeks, Andre was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. We continued to attend the same church together and were blessed to be surrounded by the people who were rooting for us, wanting us to preserve our marriage and not give up. Andre was on a new medication and was a completely new person. He was finding joy that he had not seen in years. Over the next few years, we would experience much joy. Every few months or so, Andre would fall back into manic or depressive state, and we would do our best to work our way out of it. Living with bipolar disorder was exhausting at times. It was hard to be the normal, stable, logical one of all the time. Many of my friends and family members were not supportive of my marriage and would tell me that I deserved more. My pastor would always turn me toward Scripture, reminding me that God doesn't promise an easy life on earth and that the only condition for divorce, biblically, was adultery. Let's fast forward to 2011. Money began to disappear from bank accounts. Money was being withdrawn from credit cards and strange charges were appearing. I questioned my husband and I would get brushed off. I knew he wasn't being honest and I began to suspect he was gambling. Eventually, my wedding ring disappeared and the kids' Christmas money was gone. When I confronted my husband, he got really angry and had no answer for where thousands of dollars had gone. I was really tired of dealing with his issues, so one afternoon I packed up with the kids and left. The next day I got a text from him stating he was checking into rehab for a pain pill addiction. My world was crashing. How did this happen? We were in church every week. He was seeing a psychologist every month, and he took his bipolar medications without fail. I was crushed. I knew I had to set firm boundaries for the sake of our children. I did not want a divorce, but I needed my husband to shape up big time. I decided to legally separate from my husband to give him and myself time to think things through and get things together and see what would happen. During the long 4 months that followed, I read my Bible and prayed like crazy daily. My pastor wisely counseled me over and over that God always desires reconciliation. I heard and read many testimonies of people who had been through far worse and had managed to put things back together. I prayed for my husband to be healed and for a quick restoration of our marriage for the sake of our children. After 4 months of living apart, my husband called our church and asked for marriage counseling. Counseling was hard. Trust was, and still is, hard to regain, but we talked and we prayed more than we probably ever had in our marriage. 1 month into counseling, my husband came home. Friends and family have often told me things like, God doesn't want you to live this way. Cut your losses. There's a great guy out there for you. You don't deserve this. And sometimes marriages just don't work out. Here's what I believe about marriage. Divorce is too easy and too acceptable. Kids almost never are better off. They will be hurt, they will be angry, they will be confused about their identity, they will be put in the middle, and they will be forced to accept new girlfriends, boyfriends, and steps. Marriage may not be sacred in our society, but it is sacred to me. I take my vows seriously. My life with my husband has not been easy, but I have absolutely no regrets about my choice to preserve our marriage. I have never seen my children in more pain than I did in the 4 months of our separation. I know that by watching their parents, my children are learning to honor vows, to preserve through hardship, to forgive, to pray, and to be faithful. Love is a verb, not just a feeling. 1 Corinthians 13:4-8. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always preserves.